Hello everybody. I am Prabhat Rai, and I work as Senior Research Fellow at Conceptual Play Lab here at Monash University in Melbourne. And I look forward to today's session.
Me too. Okay.
Hello everyone. I'm Radina Stoyanova, and I'm a PhD student in Sofia University in Bulgaria. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. Okay.
Hello there, I'm Glykeria Flagiavaki. I am a Senior Research Fellow at Monash University in Melbourne, Australia. Welcome everybody.
Welcome. Hi.
Hello everyone, I'm Ekrem. I'm in Bielefeld University in Germany, and I'm participating there. And I look forward to a nice session altogether today.
Yeah. Looking forward to it too. Yeah. Great.
Great. So I sent an email yesterday saying that probably if we can go first, it's late evening here in Australia, and I have to rush back because I have a young daughter. So, and we have a pre-recorded video. So three of us, me, my colleague, Dr. Glykeria Flagiavaki, and our research director here, Doctorate Professor Madeline Fleer, have recorded our presentation. And what I would do is I would run the pre-recorded presentation and would be happy to respond to questions in the meanwhile if they come our way. All right, that's fine?
Sure.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, sure. I go ahead and then share the video then.
Okay.
Can you see the screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Hello and good evening, everybody from Australia.
Can you hear the voice?
I welcome you on behalf of my colleague, Doctorate Professor Madeline Fleer, and Senior Research Fellow, Dr. Glykeria Flagiavaki. Thank you for joining us for this panel. Just to give you a background to our work, we are part of Australia's first national programmatic study on children's STEM concept formation in early years. Our research is funded by the Australian Research Council through the Laureate Fellowship, which has been awarded to Professor Madeline Fleer. So for next 5 years, our research primarily follows three interdependent lines of inquiry. First is to investigate how infants and toddlers and preschoolers form concepts in STEM. Second, which is about investigating STEM learning in family and home settings, which we are going to discuss in more detail in a while. And third is developing a national evidence-based model, working with early year teachers and educators across Australia. We aim to work with approximately 3,000 educators by the end of the project in 5 years' time. Now, today I'm going to specifically speak about our research with families, and especially with family homes, which is focused on working with families in creating motivating conditions for their children's STEM concept formation in early years. The COVID-19 crisis presented us with an unanticipated challenge, and in our today's presentation, we want to share some of our insights and our work, which is built on our already existing digital architecture, which we have been working on in advance, but this crisis situation offered a kind of opportunity for us to explore it further, and also to learn how can we work with families in this context. Before I go any further, it might be worth talking and discussing about conceptual PlayWorld itself, because the PlayWorld model is a very innovative model which values children's leading motive of play in early years to design, their learning situations. And in the conceptual PlayWorld research here at Monash, we are particularly interested in children's imagination and how their imagination can contribute to their STEM concept formation. So I would first run a recorded video of my colleague, Laureate Professor Marilyn Trier, which explains the ideas around or characteristics of conceptual PlayWorld. And then we will go into more details on how we have worked with families.
Hello everyone, I'm Marilyn Flair from Monash University. I'm Professor of Early Childhood Education and Development. I'm here today to talk to you about PlayWorlds and how you can use PlayWorlds to support your program. One of the characteristics of PlayWorlds that I'm going to be talking about is the idea of an ecology of PlayWorlds where you can use it pedagogically as educators for different things, such as thinking about scientific PlayWorld or an engineering PlayWorld, or it could be about social and emotional development. So it might be like a respectful relationships PlayWorld, or it could be some other form of narrative development PlayWorld in the area of literacy, for instance. So this is kind of the ecology. But if we're thinking about, well, what is it? It's a program of learning and development, which is about creating an imaginary situation together with children. And in that imaginary situation, we change the meaning of actions and objects and create interesting scenarios. And so there are 5 pedagogical things to think about in planning for a PlayWorld. The first one is about selecting a story. And I have metaphorically this actual basket to illustrate the idea of a PlayWorld for us, because it is going to be like your toolkit for how to develop a PlayWorld. So selecting a story is really important, and I'm going to talk about that in relation to what are the things that are important there before I share a little more about the other parts of planning for a PlayWorld. Selecting a story. First thing that's really important is to think about the story having a very complex plot, because a PlayWorld is not just one day. It might be one day every day for a week, or it might be one day in 1 week and then the next week. But the idea is that you revisit the story over and over again with the children in this imaginary space. And so therefore selecting a story which is quite complex means it's a little more engaging for the children and for you as the educator. The second part of selecting a story is thinking about the kinds of characters that are in here. You need lots of characters, but not all storybooks lend themselves well to having 25 characters. But what you can do is think about the main characters and then add to that by the main characters having cousins who live in other countries, or visitors who might come to the PlayWorld who can then be taken on as a character in the story. So that's the second thing in selecting a story. The third thing in selecting a story is thinking about the story having some sort of drama, some sort of dramatic dimension to it, so that it's exciting and also so that it can actually lend itself well to a problem situation that has to be solved and that needs to be developed over time as new characters enter the play and help solve the problem. And finally, it's thinking about, in the selection of a story, something that you really enjoy because you're going to be a play partner in the story. So that is the first dimension of the pedagogy of a PlayWorld. The beauty of Charlotte's work was that Ariana and I loved the story so much. So I think if you enjoy reading it to the children, it helps a lot. And we found over the various PlayWorlds that if you can choose a story where you can really develop empathy with the characters, that's one of the most important things for the children to then be engaged to help solve problems with the characters. The second dimension that we're going to look at in our toolkit is about designing spaces. And the designing of the spaces can be outside, so we might decide to use an obstacle course to take us to particular places where we might be visiting a special tree or a special chair, or we may be using trestle and beams to create a pathway to this play world. So the idea is to think about how we might outside use some spaces that can create this play world. Then inside the play world, we can also be thinking about what is it that we could change and what spaces could we use. So for instance, the home corner or the block corner could be transformed to be a particular play world, or another room in the centre that's not being used could become a play world space as well. But here we can say, if we say, for instance, the block corner, then the blocks become in service of the play world. So the play world is the focus and the blocks support the construction of what might be the new building or the new bridge that takes you to some really interesting place in the play world. So that's in relation to that dimension, designing the spaces inside and outside for the play world. If we go back to our trusty toolkit, we start to think about entering the play and how we might enter the play. So for instance, we might decide that we want to use a magic wand. So our magic wand is about saying, we're now moving into this play world and the magic wand is signalling that. So it's this entry in, but also the entry out. So when we go out, we might use the wand to do this as well. So that's just an example of how you might do that. But it could be in the outdoor area. It could be something like a tunnel that you crawl through so you go into this microscopic play world. It could be many different things. It could be a chair, it could be a door frame, it could be a range of things. But it's this idea of going into the play world and out of the play world together as a group. Come through, guys. I'm waiting to catch flies. Come on, everyone. Then if we go back to our trusty PlayWorld's toolbox again and we look for the next pedagogical strategy, and that's about planning the play inquiry or the scenario. What might be the problem that arises? So for instance, we might have a new character that arrives in a special little surprise box. And in this case, we have a little ringtail possum, and the ringtail possum has a particular message that they want to give to the children. And so what we have is, and it had something being introduced, and the message might be something to be solved, it might be something to be modelled, it could be anything, but it gives the possibility and it expands the play world, makes it much more complex so that it can build over time. I need some good old friends to help me with my apple orchard. It isn't growing. If we go back to our trusty toolkit again, we can start to think about what might be the way we interact. And we might say, for instance, decide that as educators that we together take on a role in the play world as well. And we may have one educator taking one role and another educator taking another role. So it's planning for how we're going to interact because we are play partners in this process. And it's really, really important for us to be thinking about what role we will take and how we will do it. I think I might like to be Charlotte the Spider. So I wanted to share some little examples of what that might look like. If we're entering the play world in costume, for instance, and it doesn't have to be, then we might take a role where we're equal with the children trying to solve the problem. Or we might take a role where we set up the problem because we come in being whatever character of the story and we explore what needs to be done and we lead the processes of being able to take this forward in some way. What would be a sign that we had seen Charlotte? What would Charlotte do with her still? So we kind of have two different roles that we could be taking, where we're with the children or we're actually leading the children. So this is just an example of planning our interactions. Today we saw Ariana and Rebecca engaged in the play world, a conceptual play world of Charlotte's Web. 5 important things were explored. The first one was selecting the story, why it's important to choose one that's very engaging. The second area that was explored was designing the play world space, both inside and outside. The third area was planning to enter the play world, and to exit the play world. The fourth one was introducing the problem scenario and how it might be solved together with the children. So the fifth one was around Oriana and Rebecca talking about the importance of planning how they interact with each other in the play world so that they can help the children collectively solve the problem and to deepen the play. Together, this toolkit of these 5 pedagogical ideas about setting up and developing a play world are really important. You need to make this your own because you'll select the story that best suits your children. You will decide how to take this forward because you know your children well, and you'll be able to build into the play world lots of these dramas, problem scenarios, and support the children in character to solve those problems.
So what you saw is an interesting example of trying to show how the model is working in the early care center space. In a very similar manner, what we are also trying to do is to take this idea forward in the family home settings. In our work with families, we have made an effort to develop conceptual PlayWorld with these characteristics. We know about, and the COVID-19 situation basically created a special scenario for us where most of our conversations were largely through digital media. And this digital pervasiveness, as one can say, is very much evident, especially in the Northern Hemisphere. There are multiple researches which talks about how children are engaging and interacting and using digital technology in their everyday life. The other point worth noting here is that these digital engagements of children are also influencing and determining their offline engagements or their engagements in family settings otherwise. So from a Vygotskian position, these digital tools are shaping children's unique social situation of development and offering a theoretical perspective to the discussion. Fleer has rightly argued that there are a number of very banal binaries which are informing and guiding our engagements and understanding of how digital tools inform children's engagement in early years. There are at least 3 one can very clearly see. One is this idea of digital versus non-digital. Though we know for sure that we are not living in this kind of divide of digital versus non-digital, but rather in a hybrid world where children use both digital and non-digital tools together most of the times. The other one is enormous fear the society has nowadays around screen time and non-screen time. In fact, the argument needs to be thought through very carefully that what is the screen being used for? Often parents have this paranoia about if their children are watching television or watching iPad, it's that they're not learning, they're not engaged. It's a very different idea of learning and how children engage with digital tools. In our research, we have used multiple digital tools which have basically helped children to be more immersed in their learning. I will come to it in a moment and discuss some of those in a while. And the third is the idea of human versus machine learning, as if the human learning and the machine learning have no relationship between them. And I think one of the interesting highlights which one can draw on from these kind of interesting binaries is that we are moving towards a world which is more thinking in terms of hybrid mind rather than thinking in terms of human mind and machine mind. So this is the kind of direction which we have taken in our research. The other important idea that has guided our research is also that the use of digital tools in the most recent past, especially in the context of crisis, has been to respond to the question of reach. But in our case, we have tried to use digital technology not just to reach, but also to amplify and enhance children's experience using augmented reality and virtual reality tools, which can create further possibilities of being immersed and emotionally aroused while listening to a story or engaged in a game. These have been our larger principles guiding the research with families. I will come to them in a moment. But at this point, maybe it might be worth investing some time in trying to understand the principles and the ideas around the use of digital tools. We know for sure that digital tools, like any other tool, cultural tool, create shared semiotic system for the collective participation in play and the home practices. So to understand these ideas, we thought that it's important for us to have a better sense of how children are engaging both with digital and non-digital tools in their everyday home setting. One of the first things which we generally start our interaction in the home settings is largely to get a time index list of home activities so that we get a sense of children's participation in these activities and how they are engaged throughout their day, how parents are engaging with them. This basically is also drawn on from a position where we are not trying to see family practices as deficit, situations, but rather to credit and use some of those practices as a transformatory space for offering STEM concept learning. Now, at this point, our PlayWorld starters, which are available on our website, basically creates a great possibility for parents to start engaging and understanding how we are trying to work with them. So our first step, as I said, is largely to develop this time index list of home activities. And the second stage is where we invite families for Zoom, Skype, or any other mode of online meeting. These meetings are spaces to co-create the characteristics of PlayWorld, as explained by Professor Fleer some time back in her video. Our PlayWorld starters gives a schematic suggestions on how families can create playworlds. And they also create possibilities for us to understand families' perspective and position and how they can facilitate some of these models. These PlayWorld starters are freely available resources from our Conceptual PlayWorld website. The second challenge we had was to give families a sense of how PlayWorld work, and that's where our app became very handy and a functional tool. And this largely helped in offering some videos which are basically giving them sense of how PlayWorlds are run. But at the same time, it also provides possibility for them to record these videos. So it worked, the way it works is it records video in 30-second chunks and then store it on the device for the families to label them later in case they want to label them as what characteristic of the play world are they engaged in, so that they are more reflective and aware of their practices. It also helped us to collect data from distance. So the data which they collect and the one which they want to share with us, they can share with us. So it's basically a collection of data made possible from distance, which is an enormous challenge in these times. Now, the second equally important intervention we basically followed was to use the virtual reality tools. Virtual reality can be used to primarily immerse the educator or parent in an example environment to the real experience situation. So it really helps the parent to see these things happening in real setting. It lowers the barrier to transforming practice because you are seeing these things happening in 3 dimensions. So for that, we use multiple 360-degree GoPro cameras, which enable possibility from the child's perspective and also from the parent's perspective to record video. PlayWorlds can be paused and have pop-up expert commentaries in between where we can embed 2D videos and create these possibilities. Number of these research initiatives and development initiatives are being done at National University in collaboration with our Faculty of Engineering in the leadership of one of our colleagues called Dr. Jonathan Lee. So the next video will give you a sense of how it plays out in real setting.
This video shows the view from within a VR headset, the scene where Prabhat is running a conceptual PlayWorld activity for his daughter. As we look around the room, we can see another camera within the scene, and if we interact with it, we teleport to view the scene from an alternative angle. We're now looking at the same scene from the second camera set at the child's height, which is a viewing angle that adults may have long forgotten about, which really helps us to empathize with the children. We're also able to pause the scene by interacting with the floating buttons in case we need to stop a bit and think about what we're observing. Finally, at certain points within the scene, we have the capability to bring in expert commentary via 2D video pop-ups, which in this case are incorporated seamlessly into the scene as a TV on the wall.
Yeah, and equally important was to amplify children's experience of storytelling, and we used augmented reality functionalities to explain or to take these things forward. These works are also being done in collaboration with the Monash engineering faculty. And here is an example.
This video shows an augmentation of the classic children's book, Rosie's Walk. We're aiming to introduce children to visual spatial language and reasoning within a playful context. As we reach the page where Rosie walks across the yard, we can bring in our mobile device to augment the scene. Here, the child can interact with the scene, resetting Rosie's position and then making Rosie walk across the yard to really associate the language and concept together. We hope this nano PlayWorld can capture children's attention and interest with its fun and playful aesthetic that the children can relate to, hopefully without needing to cut out pages from any books in the process.
So yeah, and that brings me to the last part of my today's presentation, where I want to say that, where I want to draw on some of these experiences and talk about and build on the Dairy's advice. Jan has written a very fantastic piece in trying to advise and think around how we can take forward some of these pedagogic engagements in the context of digital technology. And she argues that we need to think in terms of the design principles of our engagement with technology. And on the basis of our interventions so far, or rather educational experiment so far, I could draw on at least 4 broad points here. One is the idea of collective imagining. We consider that imagination is something which is very central and important in early years. Our research at PlayLab has not been a deficit model of looking at families, but rather a credit model where we can work and form and create, in fact, transformatory home practices. This would mean that working with families and not working on or merely seeing family homes as site of implementation of our research. The time index activity log and conversations with families helped us in this process. Creating a motive orientation and engagement with conceptual PlayWorld work in that way. Over a period of time, we tried to achieve children's and their families' long-term well-being. Conceptual PlayWorld values children and their families' agentic engagement in their children's development. Thus, the PlayWorld is not a given model of practice, but rather a collective or a common fiction being developed in collaboration with families. And that is something which has been very central to our ways of engaging with families. Second, an equally important part of our design principle has been the effective engagement and playfulness. The design of PlayWorld enhances and affords more possibility for children's playfulness. So even when we were using digital technology, either with VR or AR tools, our effort has been to enhance and immerse children in their emotionally in those play situations. thus supporting their effective expressions like excitement, joy, dramatic tensions, challenges, explorations, and often fear of failing and delight of success. Adults in these contexts have a very important role to play. So it is not that just that the child is in these play settings working on their own, but adults being engaged with them in these play worlds. Conceptual PlayWorld thus offers, as an activity setting, opportunities for robust concept learning. It makes children more aware of their everyday experiences and thus employ their experiences in gaining insight into the academic concepts. It also creates insight for them to explore more than what is given in the story. For example, in Rosie's walk, when we ask children that Rosie's friend Alia is about to visit her and can they draw a map so that she can reach her house without being caught by the fox. They ask all kind of important and interesting questions. How far does this friend live? How is she coming? As if Rosie's friend has a car. Can we make a back view mirror helmet like we have in our car for Rosie so that she knows when next time fox chases her? All these interesting possibilities of intentional concept engagement, help children to learn interesting ideas around mapping, scale, measurement, reflection. So interesting scientific concepts are learned by children in this process of conversation. What we have also done is to use some of the commonly used app like Google Map or Google Earth to talk about directions with children. Our research shows that children become more aware of the ideas of direction and relative size, distances, by listening to or engaging with these applications. By doing all this, we intend to make children relationally agentic in their learning. All this becomes possible because children and their families start to explore the transformative potential of imagination. Children sometimes identify with a character in ways beyond our imagination. We did Rosie's Walk conceptual PlayWorld with my daughter a few days back. And after the session, she came to me and said, "Papa, I want to be like a Rosie. She was very brave. When the fox was chasing her, she went on her walk. I want to be like her." The other day, she was trying to behave like a scientist fairy. These interesting identifications and emotional engagement through children's imagination make them more fully human and employ imagination for their well-being and not merely as a skill to complete a task. This also helps children to develop new narratives in their social situation of development, thus having the competence and confidence in themselves that STEM is for me. More importantly, this also challenges the dominant push-down or schoolification model of supporting children's learning, which reaches home setting from the school or early care centers. So in a nutshell, what we are trying to argue in Conceptual PlayWorld is to use these digital tools to create immersive possibilities for children's STEM concept formation with the help of considering the leading motives of children, that is play in early years, as the central line of argument. Thank you very much for your attention, and we look forward to hear in case you have any questions or in case you want to know more about our research. You can also go onto our website. You can type in FLIR's Conceptual PlayWorld. That will take you to the Monash website. Thank you very much.
Yeah, we are back. So do we want to have question session or we want to move to the next presentation? Do we have a format?
Do we have a moderator in this session?
I don't know. I think the time probably, it might be helpful. We can go to the next presentation, maybe if there are no questions. I can just see in the meantime, if there are questions, I can respond to them in the chat. I can't hear you.
Thank you so much for the presentation, Prabhat. It was great. It was really, really insightful. I really enjoyed it. I think if anyone has questions, they should refer to the Q&A and they could ask questions there in that section.
Sure.
Okay.
If not, or like if they would like to have their questions till the end, we can then move on to the next presentation.
Yeah, sure. Radina and Ekrem, I may have to leave. My colleague Glikaria would be here, and she would be happy to respond to questions. But I will surely look for your presentation later. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Okay. So who wants to proceed? Who wants to go on with their next presentation?
It's totally fine to me. I can go now, or I can go last. I can just leave the floor to you to present.
You can go now.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah,
Great.
I really have no preference, no priority about.
Me too. Go now.
Okay. Then today my colleague is not in this session, unfortunately, but she will be hopefully watching this all over again, and we will be very happy to receive not only questions but comments as well after the presentation, or during the presentation indeed. So we are for some time revolving around the concept of home. And what we try to do is try to reach some workable conceptualizations of home. It is very interesting, indeed surprising to me, to see that there is really little work in psychology on or about home. So it's a very wide concept. Maybe this is one of the reasons why it is so inadequately, insufficiently, and in fewer numbers than any other subject studied. It's really interesting. It's usually appears as a side issue rather than a main issue, a main research area in its own right. But yeah, one reason maybe it's very hard to conceptualize. But one other reason could be it is really something taken for granted. People usually take the physical entity of home, whatever it is. There may not be any physical entity of home in the first place, or the concept of home are really taken for granted, regardless of if we have one or not. So self could be a productive analogy to that. So it's not easy to talk about self, but we have many studies historically as well about self, but not something equitable to the studies about home. What we are interested in, or was in the context of migration, because of the current situation in migration affecting Europe, Middle East, and other parts of the world, of course. For some time, nothing is regional. We all experience all the effects globally. But when we try to make a research or let's say, a pilot study on the concepts of a home, how it differs between the people who are natives to some region or country and who are migrants to that country. So we just started to understand how the concept of home differs in two groups of people, between migrants, the so-called migrants, and the so-called natives. These are problematic concepts, and we don't automatically subscribe their mainstream use. We are also critical to the use of these terms, but let's say, for the sake of argumentation, there are some people who call themselves natives in one country, and there are people who are supposed to migrate to that country, and they are called migrants. So we started to understand the difference of meaning on the concept of home, but we realized immediately after we tried to make a short survey, realized that we don't have a sound basis to study the concept of home. Okay, this is that how we started to understand or to reach at a workable notion of home. It's a long story, but to cut it short, now we are there. What is problematic about home? Since it's mostly a concept taken for granted concept, it's also mostly associated with positive experiences like security, warmth, habits, getting used to it. It's with privacy, with some personalizations. It's one's personal life mostly is lived there, or one's close interpersonal relationships like family members. So it's good, etc. And on a very few instances, there are some implications about possible or potential negative implications or negative experiences associated with home, like repression, coercion, like violence, like not having a home at all. I know or you all know that the issue of homelessness is an issue in its own right. So it's part of the home and homing studies, of course, but we don't mean homelessness when we say that not having a home, because home can take many forms. It is not only a fixed dwelling in a certain location by a specified or registered address. It can be a mobile home, like a caravan. It can be a tent. Some people may simply like to pack their houses to construct, not construct, to just make a living space or place in this road today, on another wood the other day, etc. So there are many varieties, or let's say modalities of home. And homelessness is an issue related but separate than this, because we want to understand home not as it is understood, let's say, in the mainstream image. It's like it's a middle-class house in a middle-class district in a middle-class lifestyle. No, home is probably this is just a tiny segment of the concept of home, and the varieties or the differences between homes and people's understanding are, or we believe, is enormously different. That's another reason why we have interest in the concept of home. So what it relates to the COVID-19 pandemic is obvious, we believe, because there were two mottos or parolas, or parola is not the correct word, passwords. It's like Spanish. I don't know the exact English word for that. I think it's password, but let's say it's motto of the COVID-19 pandemic. It's stay at home and keep the social distance. And later, many people said that, no, it's not social distancing, it's physical distancing. Let's use it that way. And we also, for using that term, the physical distancing instead of social distancing. Even though social distancing has its own conceptual history in the Western world because of the 3.5 feet distance of social relationships. So it was not a mistake maybe, but its connotations could be different than it meant to. So physical distancing, but stay at home was one of the passwords of the era. And it was, from the first moment on, it was very obvious that not everybody is able to stay at home. Many people, maybe more than the ones who could be able to stay at their homes, many people had to work, had to go to work, had to be outside. And in some cases, there were many houses. In those houses, there were people who could stay at home and who has to go out and work or do things for the household. So it was again interesting how much or how less attention had been and has been being paid to the ones who cannot stay at home. So it was still more interesting to understand in the time of pandemic, people's understanding of home, what they mean when, or how they experience their home, if they experience differently being at home than, let's say, before the COVID-19 era, which is 3 months ago, but it is as if we are living in a completely different timeline now. It seems that everything has changed in a few weeks' time. And we have found something. Of course, it was not easy to collect data from the households, but we contacted to our students who had to stay at their homes, and they collected data while they are staying at their homes. So we didn't have to push anyone to go out and collect data for the sole purpose of this research. This would be very unethical, and this would be something we wouldn't like to do. So our students voluntarily, they volunteered and they really liked to participate in this research because it was something they could do while they were sitting in their sofa. And it also presented a new opportunity for us to collect data, because by this fashion, we were able to collect data from the same household, let's say three person in each household, and at least 2 generations, like our students who are like around 20s, let's say, 23, 24, 5, maybe some younger than that, but usually around 20s, and their parents, sometimes grandparents. So we were able to collect data, not much, but let's say enough to give an idea. So it was totally like 70 people, 69 to be exact. But in 15 different cities in Turkey. I'm in Germany, but my colleague is in Turkey. So she was able to reach those families and households. And what is different from the mainstream ideation of home is not surprising, but it's important that it's seen by the data. We see that the general concepts of the warmth, the habits, the place who one feels or one seeks for security, safety, and closeness with others. These aspects of home, they continue to exist. But there are some other and negative connotations that are or that were added to these mostly positive or mostly wanted to be positive aspects or qualities of home. And these are repression, obligation, coercion, having to do things in a much more stressed ways than they used to be, as if they were not stressful enough before. And there are other studies we know about their presence, and it's very good that they are being documented because during the pandemic, especially the people who had to work, their life got more difficult. But in general, women's life got much more difficult, especially the ones who had to stay at home. And even in the let's say socioeconomic levels, who at those levels that women could be enjoying more, let's say, liberated lifestyles. Even at that level, many people had to go back to some more, let's say, traditional or conservative kind of roles. So the age-old and the much fought against traditional gender roles reappeared. So this was like many housework are being done by more by women than men, even though at other times there could have been some sort of, not whole, we know all that, but some sort of balanced division of labor. But nowadays it's more on the shoulders of women, and it gets more difficult in houses with kids, obviously. So what I'm trying to say is, we did not make a specific research on this aspect, but it's obviously the gender issue is an integral part of any study during or before or after pandemic, when one wishes to make a study about home. We cannot think any study about home without considering the gendered divisions, roles, and the problems originating from it. So I'm trying to talk within this parenthesis, within this, so in all senses taken this aspect into account. So most of the time the repression, coercion, obligation, or having to do things, most probably our data do not say this openly, but implies that it's most probably because of the gendered issues, because of these are mostly experienced by women than men. Even though, okay, there are many peoples, including men's life, may got more difficulties, etc. But the balance is on the side of negatively on the side of women rather than men. So, but going back to what it means for the concept of home, the sense of home, the image or the idea of home in people's minds in general from a psychological perspective, probably even if the people's ideas of home, even if in reality the home itself might not be so positive, there was a positive idea of home before the pandemic time. So, and people were kind of had an agreement with that illusion of home because it is meant to be something positive. But with the pandemic, now we see that this illusion has a weakened effect on the same people that benefits from this illusion of home, because the negative aspects are so salient now, or they became salient. So it is not easy to resist to accept their presence, especially stay at home is the password of these days, and people had to stay at their home and spend much more time than, let's say, previously. So this is the basic implication of our data at hand, and we just wish to continue this study, and also following our original idea to make some comparisons, especially people who have migration background and who have not, because home is supposed to be something fixed, at least ideally, but in case of migration, that fixed thing, entity or idea has to move with you, but home is supposed to not to move. So there is a very interviewing issue in case of migration. And it's also, in quote, threatening to the natives and their idea of home, because they are now living with some new neighbors. So there are all a bunch of issues from racism to discrimination, from right-wing extremism to social policies. We all know that. But what we try to do is to look at all those issues, social and personal issues, I mean psychological issues, from the perspective of home once again, because at times if the issue is not to be solved in and around home, we hold that, we argue that it cannot be solved at all, or it cannot be not solution, it cannot be approached or studied at all. The final summary could be this: why we incline to think that way. The COVID-19 pandemic made people change the order of their behaviors, what we call behavioral hierarchy. So they put some behaviors, they reprioritize their behaviors in daily practices. But it is not certain yet if people are thinking about changing the whole behavior set about their homes. their understanding, their experience, their sense of home. And if it is just a change in the order of the existing behavioral set, then as we see nowadays, everybody would like to go back, which they call normal. And that means that nothing will change in the short run. So no novel political demands will be raised by households because they would like to go back. They would like to go back to normal. But if there are some hints that we can catch about that the behavioral set itself is undergoing a change. This means people's relationships with their homes, with the idea of home, with the ideal of home, with their experience of home might be under a change. This may bring about a change in the political demands, in the social demands, in the organizational demands, and the interrelationship between people's expectancies from each other. So it became all the more interesting. Yeah, I mean, sorry, trying to understand the different notions of home regarding different groups of people, like migration background, non-migration background. It was already interesting to us. But with the COVID-19 pandemic, I think this is still more interesting to understand if the change is only in the order of existing behavior lists of people, or the whole bucket, the whole set is itself may undergo a change. Now we intend to look from this time on this quality of the phenomena, and we hope to collect data from larger groups and make a comparison first German and then Turkish and then German-Turkish sample, because there are like more than 3 million people, maybe 4, living in Germany. So we can have, and we have like 3 million Syrian refugees in Turkey. So we can have so-called Turkish natives. There is no Turkish native, but let's say Turkish natives in Turkey, Syrian migrated background people in Turkey, German natives in Germany, and Turkish migrants in Germany. So we can make some comparative work about home. Also adding if their whole notion set is undergoing a change, and what could be the effect of COVID-19 pandemic in that. So that's it. Thank you for listening. If you have any questions now or later, please don't hesitate. Share it with me. Any comments also, you're very welcome.
Thank you so much for your talk and what you had to provide over home and the meanings of home, and how there has been some sort of a negative connotation to what was perceived as a positive connotation earlier. It's really, really insightful. And I think it's also important to note how there's some sort of a cognitive dissonance that happens when you're raised to believe, or you're fixated on a certain image of how home is supposed to be, how it's a safe haven for you, it's a safety net. And then now it has become all those meanings at once. So it has become a place of work, it has become a place of worry, stress, yes, rest, and a whole bunch of other meanings. But then it becomes complicated in a sense of what to make of home, even if it's not the physical space, the emotional space and the spiritual space. So it's really, really insightful. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the comment. I took note of that dissonance part as well. Thank you.
Yes. Radina, so we're supposed to be ending at 12:30, so we don't exactly have much time yet, but I will be telling everyone to ask questions in the Q&A section. But Radina, would you like to start? And
Yes. I will try to be as quick as possible.
Yeah, it's okay.
Okay, I will try to share my presentation.
Yeah, okay.
Do you see it?
Yeah.
Okay, as I said, I am a psychology student in Sofia University in Bulgaria, and I'm glad to present the results from our study with my colleagues from the Department of Psychology, called Generations in the Face of the COVID-19 Crisis. I would try to share maybe the most interesting results because we really don't have so much time. But if someone is interested in the research, I would like to share the whole presentation. Let's start. First, everyone experienced that as the COVID-19 pandemic sweeps across the world, it caused widespread concern due to the high levels of uncertainty which come with it. The COVID-19 crisis is an invisible threat because no one knows who is infected. It is also an ambiguous threat because no one knows how bad will this get, with a lot of uncertainty about the future. No one knows how long will this last. And last, it's a global threat because no community is safe. And also something very important, the need to social distance with conflicts with our natural desire to connect with our friends and family during stressful situations. So we tried to analyze our data, searching for some generational differences in how particular age groups experience the crisis situation with the COVID-19. There is a lot of data in the literature that there are generational differences in the way people respond to public health crisis based on their previous experience. And our research also finds some interesting results. The key questions that we asked were how different age groups respond to the pandemic. The aim of the study was to explore the levels of stress and related psychological reactions to the situation with COVID-19, and also to explore the demographic differences in perception of the stressful event of dissemination of COVID-19. And was conducted between the 17th and 22nd of March, right after the introduction of the Bulgarian government lockdown measures, and was conducted via Google Forms. We are happy that we have a sample of 1,504 participants only in a few days. The age range was between 15 to 77 years, but most of the participants were female, 81% of the sample. The mean age of the sample was about 37 years. Most of them possessed master's degree. Most of them also were married, and most of them were living in the capital of Bulgaria, Sofia, about 63%. Okay, some of the measures we used was a battery of questionnaires that examined perceived stress, control, and threat, social capital, behavioral change, emotional effectivity, sources of information, explanations of the situation, possible effects of the COVID-19 crisis, perceptions of the information and the governmental lockdown measures, and consideration of future consequences after the pandemic. First, we found that there were some interesting gender differences in perceptions of the situation. We found that men were angrier in the situation. They experienced higher levels of anger than women. And they also used humor and irony as coping mechanism in a higher extent than women. Women felt negative emotions to a higher extent, and they also focused on online communication and seeking emotional support. Female also perceived higher levels of threat, and that made them experience higher levels of stress also. Men were more adaptive, considering fun activities during the social isolation, and they also cared in a lower extent to improving quality of life, health, personal hygiene, and reducing social contacts. And about age differences, we found some interesting trends. First of all, the younger people from 15 to 29 years old experienced the lower levels of perceived control and the higher levels of perceived threat. That is absolutely opposite with the age group over 49 up to 77 years. They had highest levels of perceived control over situation and lowest levels of perceived threat. Also, people over 49 seek emotional support and online communication to a higher extent as social capital to cope with stress. People up to 29 years had the highest levels of negative emotions like grief, anxiety, fear, panic, solitude, pessimism, helplessness, and so on. And they also possess the highest levels of anger, irritation, and outrage. Also positive emotions as optimism, humor, humanity, and gratitude were found to be more typical to people over 49. Also, people over 49 were found to be most capable in survival and improving quality of life techniques and different behaviors. They were concerned about their health and personal hygiene, and also restricted their social life most. The youngest participants were more adaptive to the situation, considering entertainment activities and fun activities at home. We also find some educational differences. We found that people perceive restrictions in the social life with the growing of educational degree to a higher extent these participants with master's degree or even PhD degree perceive these restrictions most. We also find some differences according to marital state. We found that married participants had increased personal control and lower levels of perceived threat compared to those that are not married. We also find that they seek emotional support to a higher extent. Also, we find some differences according to how many people live at home. We found that households with 3 or 4 people living seek and generate emotional support to a higher extent. We also find some connections in the situation. Perceptions of personal control over the situation were found to be related with experiencing positive emotions and lower levels of negative effect, and vice versa. Perceived threat was found to be related with higher levels of negative emotions and lower levels of positive emotions. We also find that restrictions in social life is related with experiencing negative emotion, survival, and improving quality of life techniques were related with experiencing positive emotions. As a brief conclusion, despite the extraordinary and unusual nature of the overall situation, people do not experience it as highly stressful. This is obvious in these early stages of evaluation and reaction to a crisis event, when denial and shock are inevitable. I said something about the gender differences. Most important is from the study was that the level of perceived control over situations is growing with age, and focus on unresolved daily problems and tasks helps with increasing of self-control. People up to 29 years old perceive negative emotions and anger to a higher extent. The current situation interferes with their life standards and previous levels of activity. They seek emotional support rarely in comparison to other age groups. Respondents over 49 had the highest levels of perceived control at the lowest levels of perceived threat. They also faced the uncertainty of the situation, but their previous experience with crisis gives them the opportunity to adapt easier. They also seek online communication to a higher extent. What are the direct effects on mental health? First of all, governmental lockdown measures give some more space to virtual communication, more opportunities to share personal positions and attitudes. But also we should consider the lasting effects of social distance to various age groups. There's data in literature showing that people, the age differences we found from our study could be useful for could support counseling and health promoting services. which are dealing with meeting the needs of people from different generations. The importance of social connections is something that I want to finish with it. There is a lot of scientific evidence that indicates being embedded in high quality close relationships and feeling socially connected to the people in your life is associated with better health and quality of life. And that's the conclusion of our study. Thank you. Do you have some questions?
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. It's really, really insightful, given the fact that younger groups are the ones who are using media and technology more for entertainment rather than the older age groups, which are using social media and technology more for remote and virtual connection.
Yes, that was a very interesting finding.
Yeah, because you would assume that younger groups are the ones who would more likely stick to that, at least given the circumstances of social distancing or at least physical distancing. I really found it very, very interesting as to how men would also would resort to irony and humor and sarcasm as coping mechanisms given the times. With, of course, the sense of perceived control, because it's interesting how control is pervasive, because you would always think that you take all the precautions that are necessary, you try to be aware of your movements, who you interact with, but then again, like, you never have like solid immunity, or you have no solid concrete say of what could or could not happen. So that's why I think it's at least it's interesting to see how it plays out on the long run.
Yes, we will try to make a longitudinal study.
Yeah. Okay, so I guess if anyone would have any questions, they would post right away.
Another question, but just a comment and a request maybe.
Of course.
It's a very nice study. Thank you for sharing all the findings and data for us. And I find it is very related to our work, not in terms of home, but in terms of generations, which is an integral aspect of any homing issue. Sure. I just like to, give reference to your work. So if you don't mind, we would like to have your presentation or a text, or if you make an article out of it, and hopefully you'll do. We like to have a copy of it, but if you like to share your presentation, we'd be happy. The generation issue is really critical. The attitudes of the differentiation in the attitudes of the youngers and olders is very, pertaining to the homing issue. So we would be grateful to refer to your study and to learn from your study.
Thank you. I will be glad to share our work. Till now, we have papers only in Bulgarian, but we will try to make something in English. Despite the presentation, I will be glad to share.
Thank you. Maybe we could also try to make some translation, but of course, if there is an English summary, that would be very welcome.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for your talk.
So I had this question regarding how people become more aware of what home could hold several meanings at once. How does one sort of make amends with the initial or initial conceptualization of what home is, how home is supposed to be the place for security, for solace, for safety, given being surrounded by your family members and siblings. How does one sort of make amends with the meaning of home as it sort of expands or develops later on, or at least in the circumstances that we're currently living in? So like how does one sort of try to create or generate positive experiences and positive emotions in a home where it no longer has the same representation as it used to have, as opposed to in childhood per se, or like at a younger age? I'm not sure if my question is clear, but yeah.
I'm not sure whether I understand the question correctly, but my thoughts are that home as a concept has his borders, I think. And home is, from the systematic point of view, could be perceived as a house where a lot of people live in, a family or so on. But there also have a lot of inside, a lot of, I couldn't find the word, sorry. Some, I mean, a lot of going from the outside, from the media or so on. So the home now is not so close concept. It's my thoughts are is that it is a lot of sorry, I couldn't explain it in good English.
No, it's fine. It's totally okay. Okay, great. Thank you guys so much for great, exceptional presentations and talks. We could further continue the discussion. Anyone who has any sort of questions later on Slack, the platform online where it has threads to all talks and discussions, and we can sort of take it from there on Slack. And that's it. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I
Nice
really
to have
enjoyed
this
your
session
talks.
with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.